Hi, everyone. My name is Adam Samson. Thanks so much for taking the time to join this session here today. I am currently Senior Director of Clinical Operations and Customer Success at Curebase. Curebase is a provider of software and services to support the clinical trials industry, in particular, areas around virtual and hybrid trials. So what we're going to talk about today really is an area that we've really dove into at first here at Curebase, which is in this new space of digital therapeutic clinical trials. And I'd like to go through why we believe that this new type of therapy requires a new way of running clinical trials. Before I dive in, just a bit about my background. So I started as a clinician a bit over 10 years ago. So I worked directly with patients in the collection of data for clinical trials. I transitioned into supporting roles for sponsor companies within clinical research organizations or contract research organizations. These were in roles such as project management, monitoring, data management. Worked within academia for a while, as well as a large pharmaceutical company before joining my current company, Curebase, in order to really take some of these things that I had learned throughout my career in terms of where we could be better leveraging technology and put those to good use here with the awesome team that we have at Curebase. So jumping right in, sorry, there we go. So before we dive into the clinical trials part, I did want to just touch on digital therapeutics, just to make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what is a digital therapeutic, right? So they do fall within this larger umbrella of digital health. So digital health products, I'm sure everybody has some on their phone right now, right? These are, they might be an app that tracks your weight. It might be something that, you use to help give you advice on what you should have for your next meal. These are not regulated therapeutic interventions. It's when you start getting into digital medicine and into the smaller area there of digital therapeutics that evidence is required, actual clinical evidence that's gathered through traditional clinical trials or real world evidence gathering and studies. And the Digital Therapeutics Alliance has a definition here, which is these deliver evidence-based therapeutic interventions that are driven by high-quality software programs to prevent, manage, or treat a medical disorder or disease. They do mention here as well, they're often used in combination with other medications or devices, but how fascinating now, right? That we live in a world where we can actually use the software itself as the treatment, and we can gather clinical evidence around it and have it approved for use in this way. All right, so shifting gears here now, we'll focus on actually the clinical trial piece and how we think running clinical trials differently for these type of digital therapeutic trials makes sense. I do want to start before getting into the definitions by just saying, from everything that we've seen at Curebase and from what I've seen in my career, looking at these new options coming up, our ability to engage with patients, to conduct real-time user experience research in these type of digital therapeutics trials is far exceeded by using virtual and hybrid designs as opposed to the traditional kind of brick and mortar approach. So traditional trials are, how I conducted them for most of my career, honestly. These are the type of trials that, they occur, all activities at a physical location. We would call this a site, right? It might be a large academic institution. It might be a small clinic. That all activities are conducted by these on-site staff, principal investigators, clinical research coordinators. As such, all of the study participants need to travel all the way to the site in order to complete trial activities, even things as simple as providing consent and conducting other assessments. And on top of this, data are generally collected using paper documents, which are then later transcribed into an electronic system. This, of course, creates its own set of challenges. I'll touch on that in greater detail a bit later. When you hear the term virtual trials, you might also hear the terms decentralized trials. This is one that the FDA has picked up and popularized. You might also hear direct-to-patient, remote, or siteless clinical trials. Generally, these are all referring to the same thing. There is a definition out of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiatives, which indicates, these type of trials, a virtual or decentralized trial, may include any or all of the following elements. That being, no physical trial sites are used for the trial. All visits are performed via telemedicine or mobile local healthcare providers, and data are captured remotely through the use of mobile technologies. So a really wide-ranging bucket here, right? So, the same activities that the principal investigator and the coordinator were conducting on site oftentimes can be done by these virtual site staff. And then instead of using paper, data are recorded using an electronic system. Now, hybrid trials are kind of the best of both, right? So this may include some virtual activities and some procedures that require participants to travel to a physical site as they would for a traditional study. So generally, when you hear about a virtual or decentralized trial, they're referring to hybrid trials. This is the thing. This is the type of trial design that, when using these type of modalities, is most recently picked up at this point. So with hybrid trials, site activities are completed by a team, both of remote and on-site, or staff that are able to interact with participants in person. This allows, as you can imagine, for greater flexibility if you have to say, you can do the consent perhaps remotely with a participant. You can determine initial eligibility, but it might be that the particular trial requires a diagnosis that can only be done through MRI or something else that we really can't bring into the patient's home. For this reason, we would have the participant come to a physical location to have a procedure done, and then they might complete the rest of the study from home, say collecting patient-reported outcomes or other type of data collection that can be done remotely. The use of a virtual research team is really key, though. So when you think about conducting these type of virtual studies, it's critical not to forget that people want to have someone to interact with. And that is something that we've found in our user experience research that we've done, is that having those qualified team members, the study doctor and the coordinators that are there for when the patient or the participant wants to reach out and ask questions, just really helps with retention within the study. So recruitment and retention in clinical trials, these are the things that often lead to trials failing. So we want to make sure that people know, patients and participants know, that there's somebody on the other end that they can talk to. It's not just a bot in the corner that they can ask questions. They actually have a real person whenever they want. So what are the benefits of virtual and hybrid trials over traditional trials? So there's a number here. I won't kind of talk through all of them, but I'll hit on a few that I think are highly relevant for this group. So we break it down into speed, cost, diversity, and COVID-19 robustness. In terms of speed, whenever you're able to enroll participants faster, and you can do this often in virtual and hybrid trials because you can reach a larger geographic area, right? You're not limited to just those areas where there are physical locations. If you can recruit faster, you can shorten your clinical trial timelines. You can also, because data are coming in directly into an electronic system and not first onto paper and then later transcribed into an electronic system, you can make data-driven decisions in real time. You have your data faster, which really, having those data in hand sooner is very powerful. In terms of cost, so improving participant retention, as I mentioned just a moment ago, So if you're aiming to enroll, 100 participants in your clinical trial and you hit 100 participants, but then because it requires them to go into a site, every week for 6 months, about halfway through, 30% or 50% of your participants withdraw from the study without completing, you're now in a position where you haven't retained enough participants for your analysis, for your data to be analyzed and still be meaningful in terms of determining whether or not you've met your study objectives. So if you're able to improve that participant retention, it prevents you from having to go back and recruit additional participants in order to have a successful trial. Another thing that's really important to mention for this group in particular, so doing virtual and hybrid trials, doing these studies in this way is really more representative of real-world administration of what these type of digital therapeutics will be, right? They're not going to be, patients aren't going to be administering the digital therapeutics or having them administered to them within the clinic setting. In general, these type of therapies are administered, in the patient's home, at work, on the go. So doing trials in this way makes a lot of sense. And it's important for seeking reimbursement. We're hearing that from our clients as well. When you're talking with regulators and with payers, they want to know that the data that you collected as part of your clinical trial through your digital therapeutic are really indicative of what you're going to see when you release it in the real world. Diversity is something that is on all of our minds right now, and having greater diversity of clinical trial population is really enhanced when you can remove these geographical barriers as well as time constraints. So imagine a single mom who wants to participate in a clinical trial, but the clinical trial again requires her to go into a clinic that might be 30 minutes, it might be an hour away, and it requires her to go there, for every week or even every couple weeks. Imagine, somebody, even if they are interested, it really just, it might be outside of reality for them based on their competing priorities. So having those things in such a way where they can be delivered when it's most convenient for the participants is really transformative and can help us increase diversity in those populations. In addition, increased opportunities for participant engagement and obtaining outcomes data directly from participants. This is another thing that we hear a lot from payers when it comes to digital therapeutics. They want to know, and honestly, just evidence gathering increasingly, even for drugs. The regulators, the payers, they want to know that you're measuring the things that matter to the patients. If your primary objective and endpoint are these kind of obscure biomarkers, but in the end, it doesn't really help improve the patient's quality of life or their conditions or the things that matter to them, then it's a missed opportunity. And again, this can really vary when it comes to the different diverse populations. Lastly here, so COVID-19 robustness, this is just the ability to collect data, just even if there is a widespread event. And also usability data is something that, in particular during this pandemic here, we found is really something that's important to a lot of our clients. And you have the flexibility to do that in these type of virtual and hybrid trials. So one thing to keep in mind here too, right? So engage with patients early in designing trials and tools. Again, using this type of user experience research is just really powerful, we've found, in these type of conducting these type of trials and also creating the tools that support these trials. So you want to conduct this type of research by identifying and talking to the target population, interviewing, soliciting input from patient representative groups. So there's lots of patient advocacy groups, across myriad conditions now. This will help you identify and clearly define what the needs and preferences are of your specific target population. You then build those tools for optimal engagement of these participants, using input from patients to select and design the best tools possible. And a nice way of doing this, and anyone with experience in UX research will know, right? It's good to kind of map out the journey that this patient or this user will go through throughout this study, so that you can identify those points where you recognize, all right, there's going to be 3 months in between visits. What can we do to keep them engaged during that piece so that they don't lose interest and withdraw from the study? And then finally here, testing and validating with real end users. So this is something that we've employed on some of our studies where, not just getting input from the patient population at the beginning, but then, wrapping up that UX research by giving this back to the participants or for the potential patient so that they can go ahead and have the opportunity to see the end product and then utilize the feedback to make any last refinements or improvements. Keep in mind too, participation can be adapted to best suit each patient's lifestyle. So whenever you can, give choice. Everyone likes choice now, right? Maybe, today I want to pick up my groceries from the grocery store. Maybe next week I'm busy and I want them delivered to my house. Take a similar approach whenever possible. This is something that we hear as part of our UX research in these domains. So sometimes giving the opportunity for, say, a questionnaire to be filled out at home. But then when it comes to interaction with the actual site staff or the research staff, maybe they want to do telemedicine, maybe they want to actually go to a physical location. Same thing with having a blood draw. Some people might not feel comfortable with people coming into their home, where others might see that as a real opportunity to have some added convenience. So just keeping those things in mind, it does add some complexity when you are designing your trial. If you give that type of flexibility to patients and to participants, but if planned out well, you're really enhancing the clinical trial experience for the participants. Again, it can help with recruitment, it can help with retention, and honestly, it feels like the right thing to do for the patients, to give them that type of flexibility. I can't stress enough, communication. It sounds cliche, right? But it really is key here. A lot of digital therapeutics clinical trials might, go for a year or 2 years, even if it's, a 3-month course of some sort of cognitive behavioral therapy. Payers often like to see that, what do those outcomes look like? Do they hold for a year? Do they hold for 2 years? That's a long time for somebody to participate in a clinical trial. So whether it's virtual or in person, having the ability to reliably reach the participant and help them feel engaged, whether it's reaching out to them to kind of enter in a reported outcome like pain, or if they've missed an appointment, using phone, using text, using email, whatever the participant or patient's preferred choice of communication is. Knowing what that is and then being able to have that available for them at all times is key. This is a really important point as well. So when it comes to multiple technology platforms, I think we've all felt this pain, right? So when you have e-consent and the data capture and where they're going to record their outcomes, all in different systems, all with different passwords, sometimes even with multiple devices, it can get really burdensome to participate in the study. So whenever possible, really try and reduce the number of platforms. Try and make it such that you can allow patients to use their own device or provision devices if your population might need it, but letting them use what's already comfortable with them. It'll really help to alleviate some of that feeling of being overwhelmed or just having there be so many things that they have to keep track of. Really powerful again is to be able to have these data in real time. So it used to be we would have to record the data on paper, transcribe them into a system. That might take days, it might take weeks, depending on the kind of current workload of the site. Now data are entered directly into a platform like the Curebase platform here. And then you can see in real time these type of metrics. We can also set alerts, right? So if participants in a clinical trial report some sort of potential adverse event, or if they've not been compliant with an outcome measure for an extended period of time, we can get an alert that goes to the research team so that they know, okay, it's time to pick up the phone or to reach out in the participant's preferred way to touch base with them and see if there's something else that we can do to help them be successful in the study or to assess a potential safety event that might be happening. There's a lot to cover here on this slide. We don't necessarily have to go into each and every one of these. Just keeping in mind that there are a number of challenges when approaching these type of clinical trial modalities. So there's a lot around regional data protection and privacy laws. These are not, static across the world or even across, states within the US. So you want to make sure that you have a partner when doing these type of studies that understands things like telemedicine laws. The nice thing about digital therapeutics is, of course, you're not necessarily shipping a drug across state lines. Nonetheless, there are still privacy laws and other things to take into consideration to make sure that you're covered. Operational challenges are definitely present when it comes to doing these studies virtually. Again, this might increase if you're providing additional flexibility to participants. In the long run, you might save yourself time because your recruitment goes faster and retention is better, but it requires more planning up front. So you really, again, want to go back to UX research, have participants kind of go through the journey and give feedback in order for you to be able to improve your trial design, improve your tools to give yourself the best chance of having your digital therapeutics clinical trial be a success. Technical barriers are always there. Knowing your patient population and understanding if they tend to be more or less tech savvy and providing all of that support regardless with that team that's there anytime it's needed is critical. There are cultural barriers that need to be addressed, especially when doing global trials. Licensure limitations. This might be, again, touching on the telemedicine piece or state licensure for physicians if there's going to be recording of safety events, something to consider. This again, so especially the data protection, the licensure limitations, these are the kind of things that you want somebody who's well equipped or is very comfortable with regulations within these space, or a partner that's kind of done this before. Barriers to principal investigator oversight. They're not down the hall, they're across the country overseeing people. How do you manage that? Certainly possible, again, through alerts, through setting up communication channels, but something to think of. Adequate and effective study staff training, very critical no matter what type of study you're doing, honestly. Safety monitoring, again, setting up those alerts and making sure that the study doctors know how to get in contact with participants and vice versa. Limitations of connectivity between systems. Easy way to solve this one, try and get a system that has everything within it. That way you don't have to be going into multiple ways. Keeping in mind too that, as I mentioned, BYOD, having patients use their own device is always preferred or mostly preferred by participants from everything we've seen in our UX research. But there are times when, depending on the region or patient population, they might not have access to technology. So doing that type of research up front and knowing the patient population would allow you then to provision devices and not discriminate without knowing. And the last one, innate resistance to change. This is something that's always there, as we move into these new areas, leveraging new technologies and new designs. It takes kind of reassuring, especially to senior leaders, that this new way of doing things can be viable. All right, so in terms of key points here, right, we want to make sure that you're always making yourself available to the patients, first and foremost. Making sure that, excuse me, you have multiple communication, means of communication with the patients or participants in your clinical trial, whether that's, and knowing what their preferred method is. Is it text, is it phone, is it email? But also, you know, making yourself available to the patient population for UX type research early on, so that they can, you know, have some input on what the ultimate trial and what your product might look like. And then at the end, conducting, again, real thorough UX research, so that you really get good feedback and are able to make the best product and the best trial designs possible. So yeah, engaging with those patients early and often, providing patients with opportunities to participate where it's most comfortable for them, giving that flexibility, whether it's, you know, they want to do things from home, they want to, you know, do things on their phone, or maybe they feel better actually coming into a clinic to sit with a doctor and to talk about things. Giving that type of flexibility can really increase your chances of not losing otherwise qualified participants who are interested in the trial. Reducing technological friction. Technology should make things easier, not harder. This seems obvious, but if not done in a thoughtful way, or if done in a box, I mean, you'd be shocked how often, you know, these type of studies can be put together without input from a single patient, right, or a single person with the condition, or, you know, anyone who's even, you know, put together or developed the digital therapeutics on the tech side. Really pulling together all stakeholders and understanding where those pain points are, and then leveraging those areas that make sense, and not adding additional complexity just for the purpose of, you know, adding the shiny new you know, feature is definitely the way to go. And lastly here, leveraging technology to understand conditions in real time and assist patients when needed. Having that real-time access to dashboards and data, receiving alerts, setting those thresholds. You know, if not, there's just a flood of data that come in. If it's on paper, you don't have access to it in real time. Being able to use technology in this way, in a thoughtful way in your build, can really help support a successful decentralized clinical trial for a digital therapeutic product. Well, thanks so much again, everyone, for taking the time to participate. My name is Adam Samson. You can reach me if you. We are going to do a Q&A session here right after, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that excuse me, folks might have about digital therapeutics, virtual, decentralized clinical trials, the nexus of those, the type of UX research that we do to support this. If afterwards we don't have the opportunity to get to your question, or if you think about something after and you'd like to reach out, you can reach me at adam@curebase.com. You can also find us at our website, curebase.com. And again, Curebase is, you know, a partner for companies who are looking to conduct decentralized, virtual, or hybrid clinical trials. We have a software platform that kind of fills all those areas that I had mentioned before around ePro, eConsent, data capture electronically. And in addition to the software, we have those virtual site staff. So we have the PIs, the virtual research coordinators, project managers that can help make sure that your digital therapeutics clinical trial is a success. So with that, again, thanks so much, everyone, for taking the time to join this session, and looking forward to hopping into the Q&A session so that we can dive into any questions that you might have. Wonderful. See you in a minute.